The aisle was decorated with lilies, the groom's suit pressed sharp, and the bride's belly, already showing the promise of new life. But beneath the lace and smiles, a truth slept. And when it finally woke up, it didn't just ruin the wedding. It rewrote everything. This isn't a story of betrayal. This is a story of silence, of two strangers who fell in love, built a life, made a child, only to discover at the altar that they were family by blood. Brother and sister. But what do you do when love creates life, and truth threatens to destroy it? If this story leaves you speechless, or even questioning your own past, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. Would you still raise the child? Could you forgive your parents? And remember to like and share. Because here at True Crime Stories Arena, the truth doesn't whisper, it detonates. It was a morning carved from gold and silence, the kind of morning where time tiptoes, holding its breath. Inside the modest, ivy-laced church at the edge of Stonebridge County, the scent of roses and polished wood danced in the warm light filtering through stained glass. Rows of polished pews stood ready. A quiet choir rehearsed in hushed harmony. Candles flickered in reverence. Today was supposed to be perfect. Ayanna Daniels stood in front of the mirror in the bridal chamber, a gentle smile softening her anxious breath. 8 months pregnant, radiant in white lace that hugged her belly, she whispered promises only she and the universe could hear. Her mother adjusted her veil with trembling fingers, lips mumbling a silent prayer. Outside the door, the world was preparing to celebrate a love many had waited years to see blossom. Rashawn Bell, tall, kind-eyed, and immaculately dressed, paced lightly near the altar. His hand brushed the tie his late mother once gave him, his only heirloom, his anchor. Friends from college. Cousins from out of state. Everyone was here to witness not just a wedding, but a beginning. And then, the doors creaked open. One man entered. Alone. Late. Silent. He wasn't on the guest list. No one seemed to know him, except for one. Ayanna's mother. Her gasp sliced through the air like glass hitting marble. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her body froze. Her soul seemed to leave the room for a second. Her knees buckled slightly as she reached for the pew behind her. The man paused at the entrance, the light casting long shadows behind him. He scanned the room slowly, eyes falling first on the groom, and then on the woman beside him, trembling. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just watched. Harold Bell. A name forgotten by time, a face erased from photographs long ago. He was once a father, at least biologically. A man who vanished before his son, Rashawn, could even form the word dad. No child support. No birthday calls. No letters. Just absence, the kind that raises questions no one dares ask aloud. But now, he was here. Wearing a charcoal suit that didn't quite fit, with shoulders hunched as though years of regret weighed heavy on his frame. Rashawn had found him 2 years ago. A late-night phone call. A voice full of hesitation. A choice made in private. He had invited Harold to the ceremony, secretly. Hoping, perhaps, that closure could be stitched into celebration. That a man's shame could be washed clean by the sight of his son's triumph. Ayanna never knew. No one told her. No one warned her. And now, her mother, who had once known Harold in ways that would never be spoken in polite company, was struggling to stand. Some guests turned to look. Most returned to their programs. But beneath the surface, tension curled like smoke. Rashawn's eyes met Harold's. A flicker of recognition passed between them, no joy, just a nod. The kind shared by two men tethered by biology but separated by time and truth. The music swelled. The aisle cleared. But something unspoken had already entered the room. A secret. One that would not stay silent for long. Long before the silk tie, long before the wedding aisle, and long before the idea of family ever entered his heart, Rashawn Bell knew what absence felt like. He was born into the shadows of the Dallas projects, where cracked sidewalks and broken streetlights whispered warnings louder than lullabies. His mother, Denise, was a fighter. Not in the boxing ring, but in the long, silent battles of utility bills, public housing paperwork, and midnight fevers with no one to call. She raised Rashawn with the kind of strength that made softness feel dangerous. There were no bedtime stories about his father. No framed photos on the mantle. Just a quiet, sharp silence that hung over the topic like a locked room in a haunted house. Every time he asked, his mother's face would shift, eyelids tightening, mouth hardening, until the question itself became taboo. So Rashawn learned to stop asking. And start building. He studied hard. Played safe. Avoided the street traps that swallowed so many of his friends. While others joined crews, he joined chess club. While others hustled, he worked at the community library after school. He didn't have much, but what he had, he protected with his life, his name, his mother's pride, and a desire to rewrite whatever legacy he'd been left with. By 17, Rashawn was valedictorian. By 25, he was working as a junior architect for one of the top firms in Austin. Structure became his language. Design became his therapy. He liked lines that made sense, corners that met clean, and foundations that held everything his own early life lacked. And yet, something followed him. An invisible outline. A man-shaped hole in his life. No birthdays. No advice. No rough hands guiding him through life's messiness. Just silence. That silence turned into a mission. In his late 20s, Rashawn hired a private search service. It led him to a rundown trailer park outside Baton Rouge. Harold Bell. Former truck driver. Diabetic. Living off disability checks and cigarette regrets. Their first meeting didn't end in hugs. It ended in cautious nods. But Rashawn saw something in Harold's eyes that surprised him. Shame. Real, bone-deep shame. And that was enough to start something. So when Rashawn mailed out wedding invites, he added one more name. Quietly. No RSVP required. Just an open door. He never imagined that open door would swing wide enough to unearth everything. Ayanna Simone Daniels grew up in a different kind of silence. Raised in the quieter parts of Shreveport, her home was filled with sewing needles, gospel vinyl, and the endless hum of a machine stitching dreams into fabric. Her mother, Mariah, worked as a seamstress, making gowns for other people's big days, while quietly burying her own. Ayanna was an only child. Smart, observant, and warm-hearted. She always noticed things. Like how her mother's eyes lingered on wedding photos just a second too long. Or how she never dated. Or how, when asked about Ayanna's father, she'd simply say, "He wasn't part of our story." And for a while, that answer sufficed. Until the questions got louder. In middle school, Ayanna had to fill out a school form that asked for father's name. She left it blank. A classmate laughed. That night, she cried, not because she lacked love, but because she lacked truth. Years passed. She went off to college. Majored in education. Fell in love with literature, and with Rashawn. But still, the question lingered. Who was she? And where did she come from? The confrontation came one Sunday, during a rare quiet moment. Ayanna sat beside her mother, watching an old western on the TV, when she turned and asked softly, "Why didn't he want me?" Her mother paused. Then muted the television. A long silence. Then the truth, at least, a sliver of it. It was just one night. A mistake. I never told him I was pregnant. I didn't think he'd care. He didn't even know I lived in Shreveport then. Ayanna's heart didn't shatter that day, but it cracked. Because now, the silence had a name. But no face. No history. No answers. And so she tucked that crack away, deep under her smile. She told herself it didn't matter. That Rashawn was her family now. That the past belonged to the past. But fate doesn't care what we bury. It only waits, quietly, until the roots grow deep enough to break through the surface. And on her wedding day, the past had finally arrived. Not in a dream. Not in a memory. But in the flesh. In the very first pew. Watching. Waiting. Knowing something she didn't. Yet. It happened on a humid Saturday night in Deep Ellum, the kind of night where music spilled from brick alleyways and neon lights cast stories onto sidewalks. That part of Dallas was a strange crossroads. Jazz bars next to tattoo parlors, street art climbing the walls of abandoned warehouses, and souls, restless, creative, hungry, bumping into one another like stray meteors. Ayana was there with friends. It was a pop-up art gallery tucked between an old cigar lounge and a taco joint. She wasn't expecting much, just something to get her mind off work, off student loans, off the growing ache she never quite named. Rashawn was there for different reasons. One of his firm's clients had a mural featured on the far wall, an angular explosion of color, meant to symbolize rebirth. It meant little to him at the time. What stopped him wasn't the art, but the woman standing in front of it. Ayana. She wore a mustard-yellow sundress and combat boots, her curly hair pinned loosely, her eyes wide and thoughtful. She looked at the painting like it had secrets worth waiting for. He cleared his throat. She turned. They talked. Not about art. But about everything else. Childhood neighborhoods. Favorite ice cream flavors. Books that left bruises. Pain they never fully explained but both somehow recognized in each other. What started as casual conversation turned into something heavier, fuller, undeniable. By midnight, they were walking the length of Main Street, laughing like old friends. By the end of the week, they'd exchanged more than just phone numbers, they exchanged a feeling neither of them could name yet. Weeks became months. Ayana found in Rashawn the kind of steadiness she thought only existed in fiction. And Rashawn, well, he found warmth. Something soft. Something home. They never guessed fate had already chosen them. They never guessed it had already drawn the lines. The test came on a rainy morning in late November. 2 lines. Pink. Stark. Unmistakable. Ayana sat on the bathroom floor for almost 20 minutes, knees drawn to her chest, fingers trembling. She wasn't ready, at least not the way the world defines ready. But strangely, beneath the panic, was calm. And hope. When she told Rashawn later that evening, she braced for the recoil. For the excuses. For the familiar echo of a man leaving. But Rashawn didn't leave. He sat still, silent, then reached across the space between them and took her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said. And he meant it. They talked about everything that night. About money. About responsibility. About legacy. They talked about breaking cycles and starting new ones. They talked about building something permanent. The following weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, baby name debates, and whispered prayers into the ceiling fan. They started browsing cribs online. Dreaming about a townhouse near Oak Cliff. Picking nursery colors, something gender-neutral, just in case. Ayana taught during the day, Rashawn worked overtime, and at night, they curled into each other like puzzle pieces. By the 3rd trimester, they had rings. They had a date. They had a church booked. Modest but beautiful, with high windows and stained glass angels that caught the sun just right. For the first time in both their lives, the future didn't look like something they had to survive. It looked like something they could hold. They had no idea what held them. They had no idea that the man who abandoned one of them had also fathered the other. Harold Bell. Absent from both their lives. Present in their blood. He had spent years drifting from city to city, state to state, dodging responsibility with the precision of a ghost. A one-night encounter in Louisiana. A teenage pregnancy he never even knew about. And another child, born in Texas, whose mother he left before Rashawn could form a single memory. Ayana's mother never told her the man's full name. And Rashawn never had reason to share his own father's last name with his fiancée. After all, it was just a footnote. A scar. A shadow. What they didn't know was that their scars were matching. That the shadows were the same shape. And on the day they stood on the brink of forever, the truth, the cruel, irreversible truth, was walking down the church aisle in a cheap suit, uninvited. Love had bloomed between them, pure, defiant, real. But some truths are too heavy for even the strongest kind of love. Some names, once spoken, shatter everything. As Ayana's belly grew, so did the questions Rashawn had no answers for. He found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan slowly circling above them, wondering what kind of man he'd become the moment he heard that first cry in the delivery room. He'd read the books. Built the crib. Painted the nursery. But nothing could prepare him for the one fear that clung to him like sweat. What if I don't know how to be a father, because I never had one? The thought sat with him longer than he ever admitted. It followed him to work, whispered to him in the silence between conversations with Ayana. He was building a life, yes. But he'd built it on questions. And there was one man who might hold the answers, whether Rashawn liked it or not. Harold Bell. His father. Or at least the man who gave him half his DNA and then disappeared like a vapor in a storm. The number was scribbled on the back of a receipt, tucked inside a drawer Rashawn rarely opened. He had it for months. Used it once, years ago. A 5-minute call. Awkward. Wooden. Empty. But this time, the stakes were different. He dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah. There was a pause. It's me, Rashawn said, his voice low. It's Rashawn. Another pause. Then a scratchy breath on the other end. Rashawn didn't waste time. He wasn't calling for closure. He was calling for a decision. I'm getting married next month. I have a child on the way. I'm gonna be a dad. And He stopped himself. I don't know what I'm doing. For a moment, the line went dead. Then Harold's voice came, slow and uncertain. Where? The tone wasn't apologetic. Not even warm. But it wasn't dismissive either. Just, present. Dallas. December 12th, Hope Baptist Church. Noon. Harold didn't say congratulations. Didn't ask about Ayana. He didn't explain why he left or what kept him gone for nearly 3 decades. He simply said, all right, and hung up. Rashawn sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, heart pounding. He never told Ayana. Not because he wanted to lie. But because he didn't know how to tell her he was inviting a ghost to their altar. December 12th arrived with the kind of stillness that feels like prophecy. The church was dressed in light, sunbeams pouring through high windows, cascading across white roses and soft hymnals. Family filled the pews. Friends clutched tissues. The organist played a gentle prelude, and the air buzzed with the anticipation of love fulfilled. Ayana was radiant, glowing not just with pregnancy, but with hope. She had no idea that fate had already taken its seat in the front row. And then, the doors opened. Not the bride's entrance. Not yet. Another door. Near the back. Quietly. Without ceremony. Harold Bell stepped into the sanctuary, his frame silhouetted against the daylight. He looked older than Rashawn remembered, stooped, with a limp in his left leg and a suit that hadn't been tailored in years. His face was rough, unshaven. But his eyes scanned the room with careful calculation. He was looking for his son. He didn't expect to find her. Ayana's mother. Mariah. The moment their eyes met, time stopped. She was seated on the aisle, bouquet in hand, waiting for her daughter's entrance. Her lips parted. Her spine stiffened. And then, her world cracked in two. She knew him. Not as a guest. Not as an old friend. But as a memory. A mistake. A one-night blur of music and regret and youth and poor judgment, nearly 27 years ago at a hotel in Lafayette, Louisiana. She had never seen him again. She never thought she would. But here he was. Flesh. Shadow. Ghost. The color drained from her face. The bouquet slipped from her fingers. Her breath came in short gasps, chest rising and falling in disbelief. She turned to the usher beside her and whispered, almost inaudibly, that man is Ayana's father. The usher stared at her, confused. But she wasn't speaking to him anymore. She was staring at fate. The father she never told her daughter about. The father whose name she buried. The father her daughter would never, ever guess. And as the organ began to swell, signaling the bride's entrance, Harold sat down. 2 pews away from the woman who once bore his child. And directly in the line of sight of the groom. His other child. In the quiet bridal suite behind the sanctuary, Ayana sat by the mirror with her bouquet resting softly across her lap. Her hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't nerves, it was wonder. The kind of tremble love causes when it finally feels safe. She had no idea the altar was already splitting beneath her. The distant swell of the organ music vibrated through the walls. Guests murmured beyond the doors. Somewhere in the hallway, her mother was pacing in circles, silently praying for a miracle that was now too late. And then, the door creaked open. Rashawn stepped in. His tie was loose. His hands clenched and unclenched as if trying to trap something that kept slipping through. His face, once so full of certainty, was hollow. Haunted. Ayanna stood, immediately alarmed. "What's wrong?" she whispered. He didn't answer at first. He just looked at her. At the woman he loved. At the woman he'd promised a future to. At the woman carrying his child. He took a breath. One that tasted like ash. "There's something I have to tell you," he said. Ayanna tilted her head, her voice barely audible. "What are you talking about?" Rashawn's voice cracked as he said the words he never imagined he'd say. "Harold Bell is here. My father. I invited him." Ayanna blinked, confused. "Okay. Why now?" Rashawn stepped closer, like each footfall was a confession. "Your mom saw him. She recognized him." Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "She told someone that, he's your father too." The silence that followed was so thick it could have drowned them both. Ayanna's knees gave way beneath her. The bouquet slipped from her hand and thudded softly against the floor. "No," she whispered. "No. That's not possible." Rashawn knelt beside her, trembling. He wanted to hold her, but didn't know if he still had the right. "She didn't tell you," he murmured. "Just like he didn't tell me." Ayanna stared ahead. "No." A subtle shift, like a record needle lifted before the final verse. Then came the whispering. The glances. The rustle of unease moving through the pews like wind through dry leaves. The pastor spoke with the church coordinator. The church coordinator spoke with the maid of honor. And quietly, without alarm, guests were escorted out. No explanations. No scenes. Just slow, uncomfortable exits. Some looked back. Some didn't. All sensed that something sacred had been broken. The decorations remained untouched. Pale roses still bloomed on every table. Satin ribbons still curled along the backs of chairs. A gold-framed welcome sign still greeted no one. But the aisle? The aisle was never walked. The vows were never spoken. And the rings remained in a velvet box, mute witnesses to a future that had just unraveled. Outside, beneath a winter sky, guests huddled near their cars, whispering theories and half-heard fragments. No one had the full truth. But Ayanna and Rashawn did. And it was a truth that neither of them had asked for. A truth that would not only destroy their love story, but stain everything that came before it. Their love had bloomed in innocence. But now, it stood as a legal question. And a moral nightmare. The days that followed were quieter than grief, colder than heartbreak. The wedding never happened. No cake was cut. No dances shared. The church refunded their deposit within a week. The ring stayed locked in a drawer no one dared open. Ayanna moved back in with her mother, not out of forgiveness, but necessity. The silence between them was deafening. Meals were eaten in fragments. Eyes never quite met. The sewing machine in the corner, once the sound of comfort, stayed unplugged. Ayanna barely spoke. Her once glowing skin dimmed under the weight of shame and confusion. She stayed indoors. Closed the blinds. Avoided calls from friends who only wanted to know what happened. But how do you explain a love that was never supposed to happen? Rashawn withdrew completely. He stopped going to work. Stopped returning messages. He canceled the apartment lease and moved into a small, rented studio on the outskirts of town, where no one knew his name. He took long walks at night, tracing the outlines of houses lit by families that hadn't been destroyed by DNA. He avoided mirrors. He hated the man he saw. The pregnancy was no longer just a celebration, it became a reckoning. There were questions. Unspoken fears. Conversations Ayanna had with herself late at night, whispering into her pillow. What if something's wrong with the baby? What if we did something unnatural? The doctors gave reassurances. But science was cold comfort to a woman drowning in doubt. They saw each other only at appointments. Brief glances in waiting rooms. One-word updates. Silent elevators. Neither of them knew what they were anymore. Not lovers. Not strangers. Something in between. Two people linked by blood, heartbreak. And a child they never asked the universe to complicate. It happened in the middle of the night, 2 weeks before the due date. Ayana's water broke just after midnight. Her mother fumbled with the car keys, barely coherent. As the contractions intensified, Ayana found herself screaming not just from pain, but from everything else still trapped inside her. She didn't call Rashawn. But somehow, he knew. He had been sleeping, lightly, restlessly, when he woke with a start. Something pulled him from the bed. A nudge from the universe. A silent call. He arrived at the hospital just after Ayana had been wheeled into delivery. She saw him in the hallway. Their eyes met. No one spoke. But she didn't send him away. Hours passed. The pain was unimaginable. But through the haze of agony, Ayana felt something familiar, his hand, clutching hers. Steady. Present. Alive. And then. A cry. One sharp, defiant cry that broke the tension of months. The nurse smiled. The doctor looked up. "He's perfect," she said. 10 fingers. 10 toes. Strong heartbeat. Steady breathing. The child, born from a tragedy neither parent could undo, had arrived whole. Untouched by the shadow that birthed him. Ayana wept. Not from relief. But from the terrifying, magnificent fact that life had continued. Rashawn stood beside her, silent for a long moment. Then finally, he leaned down, voice low, shaking. "I don't know what we are," he whispered. "I don't know what we'll become." He looked down at the child, their son. "But I'll never leave you." Ayana didn't respond. She couldn't. But her hand, still weak from labor, curled into his. And didn't let go. In the quiet corners of Dallas, where streetlights hum and lives continue without fanfare, a different kind of family began to take shape. Not the kind that fills wedding albums. Not the kind you read about in church bulletins. But one born of broken truths and unfinished sentences. Ayana and Rashawn never moved back in together. There were no second proposals. No courtroom petitions to fix what fate had unraveled. What they built now had no name. It wasn't romance. It wasn't reconciliation. It was responsibility. It was choice. Every week, they met to pass along diapers, bottles, and quiet updates. At doctor visits, they stood on either side of the exam table, close enough to share concern, distant enough to avoid eye contact. At daycare drop-offs, they nodded politely at each other's new routines, always careful not to linger. They attended church, separately. Different pews. Different services. Both seeking something sacred to replace what had been desecrated. And yet, in every milestone photo, in every birthday gathering, in every shared moment where their child laughed, there they were. Together. Not as lovers. Not as strangers. But as something harder to explain. Sometimes they smiled for the camera. Wide, practiced smiles. They sang "Happy Birthday" in sync. They clapped when their child walked for the first time. But those photos were never framed. They stayed on hard drives and phones, untouched. Because framing something means declaring it permanent. And this? This was temporary. Shifting. Undefined. Still, it worked. Because beneath the confusion, beneath the layers of guilt, was a truth they couldn't ignore. They both loved their son. And somehow, that was enough. Enough to share space. Enough to make peace with a story that would never be told in full. Time moved forward. The world didn't stop for their tragedy. Bills came. The seasons changed. Their son started to walk. Then talk. He said, "Mama," first. "Dada," not long after. And every time they heard his voice echo through the hallway, pure, bright, unaware, they wondered if maybe love had outlived the lie. They never told him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some truths, they decided, would wait until he was strong enough to carry them. Maybe he'd ask someday. Maybe not. But for now, they gave him laughter, stability, storybooks, and lullabies. And at night, after Ayanna closed the door to her son's room and Rashawn drove away into the Dallas twilight, one question always lingered in the air like smoke. If love creates life, but truth reveals blood, what do you hold on to? Which bond is stronger? The one that made you feel alive? Or the one that made you exist? No one has the answer. Not Rashawn. Not Ayanna. Not even the child, cradled in innocence. But maybe, just maybe, there's a space between those truths, some quiet corner of the human heart, where unnamed love can still live. Not proudly. Not loudly. But honestly. And for now, that has to be enough. Would you forgive your parents? Could you raise a child born of accidental incest? Would you still call it love, or would you call it something else entirely? Let us know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena, where stories don't just end, they haunt.